Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 643 for June 29th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us, everybody, for this episode. It is good to be back. I know our schedule has been a bit wonky lately. I was on vacation last week, so
sailing
we were
the
able
seven seas, Jack Sparrowing like a madman. I love it.
Yep, I was all over the Caribbean. It was a great time. So we had little content last week, at least on the podcast side. We, of course, had reviews go out during the week, thanks to the great Dave Giannini. But we had the main show last week. We had a great time talking about Pixar and coming up with the consensus top 10 Pixar movies. But you may have noticed we had no reviews last week. And as a result of me being gone, we crunched as many as we could the week before. So we had reviews for How to Train Your Dragon, The Life of Chuck, Materialist. No reviews last week. And then this coming week, we'll do our best to have reviews for F-Wood, Elio, and we have to make up for 28 years later as well.
Which I think for that one, that review in particular will have to be a pretty lengthy, in-depth, maybe spoiler-filled conversation at this point.
Yeah, I think so. I'm really, really looking forward to getting into 28 years later. Next week will also be a bit crazy with Brendan being gone, so we'll hopefully get to record 644 together before he leaves. The reviews for next week might be me and guests to be named later. We'll see how it all shakes out. We are also going to have bonus content this week because Hollywood decided over the last week or so that
news dump.
It's a news dump. So we found out
that we don't have time for on this episode, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. Denis Villeneuve. We have a director for James Bond. He has been tapped to do the next James Bond. We, of course, have to talk about that. There are potential names floating out there for the role of James Bond as well. Perhaps we can talk about that. Aaron Sorkin is doing The Social Network too. Not just writing the sequel to The Social Network, but now directing that as well. Someone made a really astute observation on Twitter. I can't remember who it was, but it is funny that we have Fincher doing a sequel to Quentin Tarantino and Sorkin doing a sequel to a Fincher film. Like, it's a strange world that we're all living in right now.
Oh, man. Should just be Fincher doing all of them.
Yeah, it is what it is. We'll talk about that. John Wick 5 got the official green light, and perhaps my favorite, Bayformers is coming back.
I'm going to say Bayformers is back.
It's back.
I have thoughts on. I weirdly think I have more thoughts on that than any of these other items.
Perhaps. I know. I could talk all day about Bayformers, which is why we are going to do it for VIP bonus content this week. We have a lot of thoughts. We just don't have time for it on this episode.
Yeah.
So be on the lookout for that. Patreon.com/InSessionFilm, Apple Podcast subscriptions, or YouTube memberships. Sign up on either of those platforms. You'll get access to all of our VIP bonus content. Okay, with all of that laid out, on this week's show, we are going to jump the wave and join everyone in talking about the best films of the century so far.
Yeah, this is not a unique topic at all. We did not come up with this. We are totally piggybacking off of everybody right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a conversation, I feel like, for at least a few months now. Film Spotting, who we, of course, are big fans of, Adam Kumpenar, coming back just a few weeks ago to talk about best films of the decade so far. They did an episode, a month and a half ago, talking about their top 25 of the last 25. So that episode comes out, and it feels like in some ways it feels like they pulled the trigger because they did that episode and then it's just been a talking point over the last month and a half.
I feel like they're really good at like trend setting when it comes to movements in film criticism. They usually always tend to be ahead of the curve in some way.
Absolutely. So we figured, you know what? This month, June, for us has been dedicated to a lot of best of topics.
Oh, it's been very celebratory. Yeah.
Very celebratory. We, of course, did the aforementioned episode with Adam Kempenaar for best films of this decade so far. Leading up to that, we had a few other topics in relation to that, talking about scores and performances, I believe it was. Next week on the show, we are going to be doing best of the year so far. So it just makes sense. You know what? Let's keep the trend going. Everyone is talking about their favorite movies of the last 25 years. Let's talk about our top 25.
Everyone's tweeting how many that they've seen based on that. What was it? That New York Times article.
The New York Times article.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a lot of people, bragging about how they've seen like 70 or 80 of the top 100. And here we are with almost all 100 having been seen. I'm like, I need new hobbies. I need to get more hobbies.
Yeah. Easily saw 99 of those 100. It was the Agnes Varda film.
Oh, the Gleaners and I. Yeah.
And I felt so ashamed that
Varda
was the one that I was missing.
I know, who's one of my favorites for sure. I haven't seen that one either. You had 99 that you had seen. I had 97. So I think the other two I haven't seen were, well, I know the Gleaners and I was one of them. The Andrea Arnold film, Fish Tank, I haven't seen admittedly.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm trying to recall what the third one was. I think I have a screenshot.
I was going to say, I know you've seen, I like even as I was going through it, because I seen that you had 97.
Yeah,
I really couldn't tell because I know we had talked about most of them here on the show.
All of them have been referenced in one way or another on the show. So it's funny as we're talking here. I got to see if I can find that that screenshot of 3 that I did not see. Oh, Tony Erdmann. I have not seen Tony Erdmann.
Tony Erdmann. Okay,
yeah.
So you were not here when we did that review then.
I was not. No,
clearly. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so the New York Times article and also David Ehrlich at IndieWire, or maybe it was the IndieWire staff, I can't recall, but they did their top 100 a week ago as well. So, yeah, this has been a talking point over the last week and a half, month and a half. So we just figured, you know what, let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And being on vacation last week, honestly, was a godsend because I had a lot of time to think about this. And I know that I'm on vacation and maybe people do their vacations differently where they just want to go to the beach and relax and not think about anything stressful.
Well, for us, sometimes thinking about movies is that form of relaxation, right?
Well, that's exactly what I'm leaning to. I loved it. I had a great time. The only challenge for me is that because I'm on a cruise, I don't have the internet for most of it. I am offline. So I had to do my best to recall through memory. I was able to get some data when we were docked at some of the islands. So I was able to quickly get on the internet, screenshot my list for Letterboxd before getting back offline.
I feel like being offline for an exercise like this might actually be a blessing in disguise in some ways, because then it forces you to not overthink maybe where you had something ranked before.
Well,
and maybe
I want to talk about that. I definitely want to talk about that.
I think, it's a high level thing. Yeah.
That was, there was a little bit of that.
Okay.
It was a godsend in the sense that, I could sit there and just rank the films based off of how I feel about them or how they've grown on me over the years. But I was able to get my list from previous episodes, which I do have listed here. On episode 363, we did best of the decade for the 2010s. Episode 600, we did best of the decade for the 2000s. And as I've mentioned twice already, just a few weeks ago, episode 641 was best of the 2020s so far. Right. So I did gather those lists, and on my phone, I had already had a bunch of my original top 10 list that I could also go back to and refer. So even though I was mostly offline for this exercise, I did have access to some of that data, and I could just sit there and think about it and try to decipher how I wanted to rank these films. And I spent a lot of my cruise doing this, which might sound banal to some, or I'm not doing vacation right. I don't know, but I loved it. Like I was doing something really fun.
There is something about being in a very scenic place, thinking about these things, that actually makes it much easier, much better, more therapeutic. It kind of forces you to think of it less mathematically and more emotionally, I guess, which I guess allows you to arrive at the right conclusions more efficiently. Just having that beauty surrounding you, that relaxation, I can only imagine that was really, really stressless. I would have liked to do that.
I mean, that tranquility was certainly a part of it. Now, I do have to talk about the math of it all because admittedly, it was a big part of the formula for me in some ways. But yeah, we had a balcony room, which was really great. And you go out there at night and it's pitch black, so you can see the stars really well.
Sure.
And you're just sitting there on your balcony enjoying the breeze as you cruise there on the ocean. And it really is a peaceful setting, even if you're just sitting there doing nothing. But to be in that spot and then also engage in this exercise, which again was really fun for me, certainly added a poeticism to it that I really enjoyed. There's no doubt about that.
I can only imagine.
So yeah, on this episode, we're going to, I think we decided on our top 30. I do have a 50 here. I don't know if we'll have time to reveal a full top 50, but...
Well, we're certainly not going to do a top 100 like all these other media outlets.
Yeah. But I do have a top 30. Brendan has a top 30. I think we're going to start there. We'll see how the episode goes. Maybe we can reveal more at the very end of this. We are also, speaking of Film Spotting, we're going to steal their formula here as well. Because if you know Brendan and I and how we typically do our top 10 lists at the end of the year, there is objectively no, there's no way that we could do a full top 30 doing it that way.
We can't.
We would be here for 6 hours.
Yeah.
At the
Very
least.
rarely do we, steal the templates of other podcasters, but here we're openly basically saying, we're taking their formula for this one.
We have to. In
to.
order to fit this under a 2-hour bill, and that's the goal here.
Yeah.
We have to do it differently than we usually do. And I loved the way they did it, where they revealed 5 at a time and then talked about how they arrived to those 5 films at those particular spots.
Yeah. And you and I had talked about this offline as well, because many of these films that we're going to highlight here, we've discussed at length on this show many times
as well.
Before.
Yeah.
And I think by going through each individual film and talking about the films themselves, that's a very redundant exercise at this point. And I think the more fascinating side of it is going to be, the mathematical side of it, how we arrived at those particular 5 and those placements, how they may have shifted or changed over the years. It's more so a discussion around the placements themselves as opposed to just the films themselves. And I think that's going to be really interesting.
Okay, I've mentioned it a few times, and you just did a second ago as well. I want to ask you about the math.
Okay.
And how that fit into your criteria here in juxtaposition to the emotional aspect of this.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you approached this. Did the math at all influence your decision making?
A little bit, but more so maybe what you had done when you were on your cruise and you found some individual times and pockets where you had minor connectivity to the internet to just take some simple screenshots of what your list used to be. I more or less did the same thing to at least get a basis of, okay, what films have I already talked about in some capacity within an exercise like this? So it was more so a way of maybe not doing it mathematically, but just gaining the I guess gaining the inventory to work with, if that makes sense. And then when it came to whether it be re-ranking them or stacking them up against each other, that's where I decided, okay, you know what? I'm done with the math side of it, because sometimes when you put these lists together, whether it be an annual best of list or maybe for a particular decade individually, you try to deviate certain things to make sure that you're representing a different variety of films in your top 10, maybe to give it some certain distinctions, but it might not be the truest of lists emotionally. So like, for instance, maybe if I were to do a top 10 of the 2010s, for instance, I might make it a point to not have two films from the same director in my top 10, just to add some variety.
Gotcha.
But when it comes to this particular exercise that we're doing now, looking at the past 25 years, I don't care about that criteria. I don't care about that anymore. It's more so, okay, how do I feel about these films right now? So it became an emotional exercise that then started off as an inventory gathering, a procurement exercise. So it became mathematical and then shifted into something more emotional by just speaking to what I'm feeling right now in the moment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm with you in a lot of ways, but admittedly, the math did play a significant role here, at least to create a foundation, because some of the films I'm going to talk about on this episode have raised they've climbed higher on my list since we did those previous lists. However, I did find it interesting. Usually when we're talking about math, it's in a negative context, or at least in a satirical context. Here, I did find it interesting and how helpful it was in some of the experimentation that I did. Okay. Because when I was going through my list, I would find films that were ranked on my year-end list, obviously quite high in the number 1 or number 2 spot. And they were also on my best of the decade list for whichever decade that they came in. And I would then compare them to other films that came out either in the same year or in that same decade. And I double crossed that to like how they compared on this list, the one that I was creating for best of the century so far. Because there were times where the math didn't add up to me. And so I was looking at my best of the decade for the 2010s or the 2000s, and I was looking at two different films. I'm going, okay, I have X film ranked higher on best of the decade, but for best of the century, they're reversed. Why? Like, why was that the case? So then I went back to my year-end list or my best of the decade list, and I started to move those around a little bit. So doing this exercise actually changed my best of the decade for the 2000s and the 2010s specifically. My 2020 so far that we did a few weeks ago, I didn't really mess with that much.
It's too recent. I feel like I'd feel the same way about that. But I'm with you as far as our exercise doing the best of the 2010s and then the best of the 2000s, which I think was a year ago around that point when we finished our 2000 retrospective. Yeah, episode 600. There are definitely a few shifts there for me, but the best of the 2010s is where I saw the most changes. Even in my top 5 for that particular decade, I saw quite a few changes there. There was a lot of reorg happening.
Yeah, and that's again where the math did help, because again I was cross-referencing the order that I came up with for best of the century. How did that compare to best of the decade? And it wasn't always the same. So I found that fascinating. So then I went back and I was looking at my best of the decade list. I was making those changes to reflect what best of the century looked like. And even at a granular level, when we're talking about years, because sometimes you have 2 films in a given year that are also on best of the decade, like high end, like in my top 20. Yeah. And sometimes those were on the verge of crossing over. And so then I had to think through, okay, well, I have X ranked my number 1 of whatever year, and it's high on my best of the decade. The one that follows, where does that fall? And there were times where the lower ranked film, I wanted higher on best of the century. And so then I had to wrestle with that. And I don't know if I would have gotten as specific. And I know we're talking in broad terms here because I'm trying not to reveal.
We don't want to
my
reveal
list.
anything just yet.
But once we get to the actual films, a lot of what we're talking about here will make a lot more sense. And we'll certainly come back to this. But yeah, there were times where I was really wrestling with that as far as, well, maybe even though I have X film at number 1 in a given year, maybe it's actually number 2 because I kept wanting to rank this other film higher for best of the century.
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier that I think the most changes I saw, at least in the ordering of things, was my list for the best of the decade for the 2010s specifically. A lot of the same films are still part of that conversation for that particular decade. But I think the difference here is that, and maybe it's just me as I get older, I tend to disregard the whole objective versus subjective side of analysis. Because back in the day, I was trying to do a balance here. It's like, okay, there are obviously movies I have ranked highly because they're very much me movies.
Yeah.
But then you have these other movies that I feel like I need to put above it because I simply think they're more significant movies. They're better movies. They have more importance and will have more longevity. But now with regard to this particular exercise, I sort of disregarded that mentality and really looked at it more so emotionally speaking. So that's where some of those shifts start to happen. So you might see more movies ranked highly that are just simply Brendan picks because I'm not really doing that balancing act as much anymore. I'm more interested in just speaking to the way that these films move me in particular. And that's where I think some of the biggest changes really stem from. I think most of those changes happen because I just choose to look at film a little bit differently as I get older.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I feel like I've had the antithetical progression.
That's so interesting. Well, that's what makes it. We're finally having some disparity here, which is what I love about our ranking episodes.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of my like the films that I ranked number 1 for a long time were those quintessential JD picks, right?
Right.
Where I have something like Warrior as my number 1 of 2011 when I did that exercise initially. That is not the case anymore. And this isn't a spoiler by any means. I've talked forever about how The Tree of Life is not just my favorite film of that year now, but it's in my top 20 of all time. It's in my top 10 of all time. So obviously there's a bit of a change there. But I've also had films like Inside Out, Midnight Special, First Man over the years, Where the Wild Things Are. Those were Once from 2007. I had Once as my number 1 film of 2007 when we did that list initially in a year that many people claim is one of, if not the best year for cinema ever.
2007, baby. Yeah.
It's a really incredible year. And to your point, there's certainly a lot of debate to be had about the subjective emotional response to something like Once versus the objective, holy crap, look at all of these great artistic masterpieces that came out that year. And I feel like over the years, not to say that Midnight Special or First Man are not my favorite films of those particular years anymore. I think I still feel that way. What is that, 2018 and 2016 respectively?
Yeah.
Those two are probably still number 1 for me. But something like Warrior, Once, I think those have dropped a few spots. They're still in my top 10. They're still probably in my top 5 for those particular years. But I do think I have, to your point, had the antithetical progression where the films that are now starting to resonate the most with me in a given year, it's a bit of a middle ground of how I look at a film emotionally speaking, but I do also consider the artistic value and merit associated with that film as well. That doesn't always align with the consensus though. And I think Midnight Special and First Man are quintessential to that.
They do find that middle ground, I think.
Yeah. I mean, because I do obviously respond to those films incredibly well.
Yeah.
But also the consensus on both of those aren't top 10 movies of those particular years, but I would still argue that they are the best of their given year. So
there is something also charming about that too, at least internally, where you can kind of go to bat for those movies as sort of your movies, right?
Yeah.
Not to say that you own those movies or anything like that, but there's sometimes a little bit of pride you can have in maybe spearheading a certain love for a movie that doesn't quite have the love that you have for it just yet, as if maybe you're helping to promote it or showcase it. I think we all as film critics take a little bit of pride in those movies that we have individual relationships with that might not be as universally shared. And I think that's always fun to do.
Yeah, I agree. So it's been really interesting to see that shift over the years. And I do think that was a part of this exercise in a lot of ways as well. Again, going back to that dichotomy of emotion versus the math.
Yeah.
And I did keep coming into a bit of that roadblock that I say somewhat positively, like, you know, because as I was formulating the list, the emotion was certainly driving a lot of it, as I think it should
I agree.
for all of us.
I agree.
However, when I arrived at what the list and how I felt about it, I would, again, as I noted earlier, I would double check to be like, okay, I have this film slotted at 8. How does it cross-reference to how I feel about best of the decade? Not necessarily the original list, but how I feel about them now.
Yeah.
And there were times where I'm like, okay, well, even the updated version of those lists, I have a film ranked higher than the one that I'm looking at. Maybe I do need to reverse them on this list. So the math was still always a part of it, but in a way that I do feel like was ultimately conducive to where I landed with the list. It was a positive reinforcement is what I'm trying to say. And it never came into this formula in an under or an overwhelming way. I particularly wanted to use it in a way that was helpful.
Yeah, kind of like how we did our Pixar ranking just last week, right?
Exactly.
Where the math became sort of a supporting confirmation of how we were emotionally formulating that list. Anyway, it was more of a basis, and that's I think that makes a lot of sense. And as I mentioned earlier, I sort of did the same thing by letting the math sort of dictate the selection process.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's how I started things.
Yep. Totally there with you. The other thing that I did as well, especially when I was trying to figure out the really specific detail of how I wanted the top 10 or the top 20, those high-end films of best of the century.
Yeah.
Because you're splitting hairs, right?
Sure.
So there's not much distinction between, you talk about having to pick between children. When you're talking about best of the century, you're talking about your favorite films in any given year that you deeply love, and then you're having to rank those. It's insane.
I think that's a very fair description because we often say when trying to select between certain favorite films of a certain year, it's like trying to pick your children or trying to rank your children, which is impossible. But I think that saying is even more applicable to this exercise in particular for us specifically, because you and I are at a certain age where many of these films that we're going to talk about were formative movies for us. When we get to the high end of our respective lists, we're talking about all-timers for us. I can pretty much say, like, when we get to my top 5 of the century so far are probably somewhere within my top 10 of all time. It's getting to that point because many of these were life-changing experiences for us. So we're at that age where we're kind of the younger side of things. We didn't grow up in the 1960s or 70s to have The Godfather be that for us, even if we love that movie. But this is where we're going to be starting to talk about some all-time favorites. So ranking our children is a very apt way of describing it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, again, circling back to the emotion or like the emotional response to a film, how I've progressed with a lot of these films. Because I say this at the risk of sounding pretentious, but a lot of it for me also simply comes down to what I've really come to cherish over, I'd say, the last 7 or 8 years when we're talking about the craft of a film, how it provokes a response out of me intellectually, thematically speaking. A lot of that is very much in play as well.
Absolutely.
I won't reveal where I have it, but for example, I look at a film like In the Mood for Love. That was in my top 5 for best of the decade for the 2000s.
Yeah.
I think a lot of you have that high on your list as well.
I had that at number 9 of the 2000s. So we both had it in our top 10.
Yeah. Do I respond to that emotionally the same way I do as Inside Out or First Man or Midnight Special? No. Do I respond to that film in a very different way when you're looking at its cinematography, its editing, its composition and framing, the color palette? I look at that film and just in its aesthetics, like that alone, it's on a higher plane than most other films.
Sure.
The thematic and intellectual value that film has, I think, is profound. Like it's equally profound as something like The Tree of Life, but just in a very different way. The Tree of Life, I think, encompasses all of it, which is why it's in my top 10, top 5 of all time. The In the Mood for Love, I respond to it in a very different way, where before I think I don't want to say overly, but my first priority was the emotional response.
Yeah.
And now I find myself in a middle ground where I equally value those things, the intellectual, the thematic, the aesthetics, the cinematics of it all.
Yeah.
Have kind of equaled the emotional value. And that
it's all
was
about a
certainly
balancing
big part
act.
of
You're
it.
basically creating this like seesaw of sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's where I find myself these days, and why this was a lot of fun trying to your point earlier, like bring great variety to your top 10. The other thing that I did in terms of the math is that, and again, this circles back to, okay, how am I ranking these 10, these 20, my children? How do I rank my children? I would take a film that was in my best of the decade, my top 10 or my top 5, and I'd go, okay, The Social Network, for example.
Yeah.
That was in my top 5 for best of the 2010s. If I was to place that in the 2000s, where would it rank? Just on its own, not best of the century, just in the 2000s.
That's a very interesting exercise.
That was extremely helpful, because once I found a place for it in the 2000s, when I got to best of the century, it all fell into place. Like
I'm playing that game right now.
Immediately fell into place.
I'm looking at The Social Network in particular and playing that exact same game, thinking, okay, if this came out in, I don't know, anywhere between 2000 to 2009, how would it rank with those films in that particular decade? That's a very interesting exercise. That does change the perspective quite a bit.
It does. And that was really helpful to me in terms of placing it for best of the century. Because then I had a reference of, I didn't have to keep going back to, well, I have it maybe, like I have it lower on best of the century than I would like, because it's like number 3 or 4 for the 2010s. I feel like it should be higher.
Yeah.
And there was like this gap.
Well,
it just couldn't. And so then I had to go back and go, look, okay, forget the 2010s. Where does it fit within these films? And just like that. Well, and I did that for the rest of my list. And boy, it all fell into place after that.
It speaks to a lot of things. It speaks to something I mentioned earlier, that many of these films were formative experiences for us. And I think for our age, most of those films fall in the 2000s specifically. So we have more of an emotional relationship to those movies, because many of them we've literally grown up with, we've literally come of age with. So in the case of something like The Social Network, I'm thinking about this, that was in my top 10 of that particular decade, the 2010s specifically. But if I were to throw that movie into the 2000s, it might not even make my top 20 for that particular decade. But I think that's partially because of either how strong that decade was, or is it just because we have a more personal relationship to those movies from the 2000s that we've literally grown up with, and that does change things. So it does, to your point, it does add additional perspective when you start thinking about these movies non-related to each other. And that's a really interesting way of doing this whole exercise. I think I was subconsciously doing that without realizing it. So I'm glad you were here to kind of put it into words what that exercise ultimately was.
Yeah.
And I guess I was doing that too.
Yeah, that's what it is. If anyone is having a struggle as far as how to place these films, especially at the top, man, that changes the game. It makes things a little bit smoother for sure. All right, before we get into it, any other criteria that you needed to talk about?
No, I don't think so.
Here?
But I will just once again reiterate that I did. It sounds like maybe unlike you, and this is going to make it fun for this whole exercise. I did put a little less emphasis on the mathematical varieties that I usually do when it comes to list concoction. So I'm not thinking as much about, okay, I have so many films from this particular filmmaker, can I make room for someone else? Or I have many films from this particular year represented, should I add more for something else? I'm not as interested in that. This was more of a, let's go with my gut. Let's go with my gut. And I think it's going to be a great reflection as to how I'm feeling right now, which is what I think this exercise should be, at least for me.
And that's perfectly fair. Again, to a degree, I very much did do that. I did not consider filmmakers, should I only include one of their films? That was never a thought for me. I just considered the films themselves. The films themselves.
I will admit, there is a filmmaker, I won't say who, and I won't say what films as well. 2 of this individual's movies are in my top 10 of the century.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's perfectly fair. Honestly, looking at my list, I didn't even count. I think it worked out in the sense that I just have there is. I have two.
Actually, I'm looking at my.
I'm counting them as we're.
Okay.
I have
in my top
2 filmmakers that have 2 each. Yeah.
In my top 20, I've got 3 filmmakers that are represented more than once.
Okay. Yeah. I
think.
2.
Let me see. Oh, yep. I've got 3 filmmakers that have at least 2 films in my top 20.
There you go. All right. Yeah. And again, I'll just reiterate, the math was never a deciding factor. It was a supportive tool, as I noted earlier.
Sure.
But I really wanted to use that, and maybe where it came into play the most was helping me determine how much I value these films in comparison to the others. And that did push some films down because to your point, and while I wish that I could have just been all guttural about it, the intellectual side of me, I think would have given me incredible anxiety if I just did that exclusively.
I think that is perfectly
because then because you brought up how the 2000s was formative for us, and that is representative of my list as well. However, the 2010s was formative for me as a critic. We started InSession Film in 2013, early 2013. 2012, we weren't officially InSession Film, but we were watching movies every single week. It was basically the same lifestyle we do now. We just weren't doing a podcast.
Right.
So 2010, 2011, and 2012, it's still a lot of the same things that we do now. We just talk about it each week here on the podcast these days.
Yeah. But this time we do work for it.
So it was formative in a different way. However, I kept looking back at my list for the 2010s, and even though they're recent, the 2020s as well. And I kept thinking about how, okay, if my best of the century is just full of films from the 2000s, how much do I love these films? Like, should I rank other films higher if they're not infiltrating this list in any sort of way? So that's where the math, again, was helpful to me constructively.
That's true. That's fair.
And so it helped me reevaluate how I felt about my best of the decade for the 2010s and to a smaller degree the 2020s. Again, that list is very fresh, so I didn't really change it all that much.
I still feel pretty good about that one.
I still feel really good about it as well. And that did help formulate my best of the decade, or reformulate my best of the decade for the 2010s, which then helped me consolidate how I wanted this list for best of the century to look. Yeah. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So if the math felt off, the whole thing didn't quite gel for me until I was able to kind of bridge the emotional and the intellectual. Not that it was about math. It was never about math. It was more so about making sure that the list at the end of the day emotionally felt right to me.
It still makes sense. It still
made sense to me. And again, that's where the math was just a supportive tool in the end.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump into this as we do our top 30 movies of the century so far. Depending on time, maybe we'll get to our top 50. Who knows?
I don't know. My honorable mentions only ran out to like a top 41 or 42.
Okay, fair enough. 41. What a random number.
I just threw a bunch of honorable mentions in there, but it didn't mathematically end up at a top 50. I just didn't. I didn't overthink it in that way. I was more concerned about the top 30 for this exercise, which at this point now I'm pretty happy with. Happy.
For me, it was less about overthinking it, and it was more so I just couldn't stop myself. I was having so much fun talking about all of these great movies, and even stopping at 50 was a challenge. But I was like, okay, I'll stop at a 50 for now. But there's just so many great movies that come out. It's hard to just stop. But
yeah, I don't know if we've made this clear, but movies are good. Movies are cool.
Good. Yeah, we love movies. Turns out. Brendan, let's talk about coffee.
Is it going to give you the hiccups?
It's going to give me the hiccups. Yes. I got this.
I know that's toothless, but the only like play on words I can think of was hiccup there.
No, it's good. I went to Universal before we went on our cruise, and all I wanted was to go to Bark, the new Epic Universe. But we couldn't go because one, it's August. It's the summer in Florida, and that means it's 1,000,000 degrees outside.
Yeah.
So generally going to the parks is not a great idea, but I don't want to be waiting 2 hours for lines. The way we did it at the normal parks, that wasn't the case. Which I just got to say real fast. I know we're here to talk about coffee, but
I was going to say,
just give me a second here, okay? Because I'm on the Universal thing. I had never been since they made the new Jurassic World, the what do they call it? The Velociraptor coaster.
Oh, that thing, yeah.
It's new. It is one of the best coasters I've ever been on.
So you're saying it's better than any of the Jurassic World movies?
Oh, 100%. It is the best thing associated with Jurassic World by a wide margin.
That's hilarious.
Really, really good. Anyway, I also got this great coffee mug, this toothless coffee mug, which I love. I'm never going to use anything else. And what's in here is my awesome Coffee Cult coffee. We're from Coffee Cult.
We're recording this at a very good time, as in like it's an appropriate time to be drinking coffee. So good for you, getting a little toothless caffeinated action in there.
Exactly. Coffee Cult, they source specialty grade coffee all over the world. We're talking about high-end gourmet coffee. It is the very best. You don't need to put milk and sugar in this. I promise. It has great flavor notes all on its own. That's what specialty grade coffee is, like high-end specialty grade, which is what Coffee Cult roast. If you don't believe me, go check it out. Get it 15% off. CoffeeCult.com. Coffee with a K, cult with a K. CoffeeCult.com. Use our code ISF25 and you'll get 15% off at checkout. Again, that code is ISF25, 15% off at checkout. And we thank Coffee Cult for their support. All right, Brendan, let's talk about t-shirts. I
Okay.
am wearing one of our newest shirts.
All right. For those on YouTube, let's take a look at this. Let's
Okay,
take a
we're gonna
look
take
at
a
this
look.
who are watching on YouTube. You got a good visual of what we're
Yes.
talking about here.
If you're listening to the show on Apple or Spotify or however you listen to the show, go to YouTube to check it out. You can also just go to the website. We'll talk about
That's
it
even
here
better.
in a
Just go to
moment,
the just go to the store itself.
But I do have on our brand new I Could Use a Boost t-shirt.
Look at that beauty. Look at
It
that thing.
turned out great. The first time I wore it, I went to our local grocery store here to pick up some stuff, and both the cashier and the bagger both said something to me about it. They're like, "Oh, we love that movie." I was like, "I do too." It turns out.
That should be one of those shirts that we really try to push for. I think we can make a profit there, don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I love how this turned out. It turned out
great.
fantastic.
Looks great. You sent me that image and I was like, hell yeah, this is the one.
Yeah. So I Could Use a Boost. Obviously our Wild Robot themed shirt. Go and check it out. Brendan suggested this like a few weeks ago, like a month ago.
I'm surprised we haven't thought of it yet. It's like,
Yeah,
that's a great
I'm
idea for a
surprised
shirt.
as well. And I was like, you know what? He's right. I need to do that. I did. I immediately got to work.
You
and-
got to it really quickly, man.
Yeah, I did. I was very motivated after you said that. So I Could Use a Boost. Go check it out. You can go to InSessionFilm.com/store or go directly to our store at InSessionFilm.dashery.com. It's all built through TeePublic. You can go directly to TeePublic as well. But at InSessionFilm.dashery.com, you can see all of our designs there, including this one. We have a Sinners design. We got an Arrival design. All kinds of fun new things happening at the store. Go get yourself a t-shirt. TeePublic is having promos all the time. Like I got this for like $15. So it was nice and cheap and I love it. I'm going to wear this all the time.
Looks great, man. Looks great.
Thank you. So go check it out. Again, that's InSessionFilm.com/store or InSessionFilm.dashery.com. And we thank everyone's support. All right. We're going to do 5 at a time, and then we'll just kind of briefly talk about those 5. So, Brendan, what are your 26 through 30?
My 26 through 30. I guess I'll go backwards from 30
Yeah.
through 26.
Okay.
And I think it's really appropriate that you cited The Social Network as an example of how that might stack in its respective decade versus, let's say, the 2000s, because my number 30 is The Social Network. So it's a
Okay.
great way to kick things off there. David Fincher and Aaron Sorkin making one of the more timely films of the 2010s for sure. Number 29 is a movie I know I like quite a bit more than you do, and it's one I'm still liking more as time goes on, and that's Steven Spielberg's Minority Report. Number 29 there.
Okay.
Number 28, Terrence Malick's The New World ranks very
okay.
highly for me. Number 27, Spike Jonze's Her, which was very high for me, and not just its respective year, but one of the best of that particular decade, the 2010s once again. And number 26, to finish off this first 5, Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums, number 26.
Okay. Really good stuff there. I am immediately intrigued as to where your list is going to go with those films being in the 26 through 30 range. Remind me, for Her specifically, was that in your top 10 for best of the decade?
It was my number 1. It was my number 1. So this just goes to show how I'm looking at things a little bit differently.
That's why I wanted to ask. I don't remember it being number 1, but I do remember it being pretty high on that list.
It was in the top, and it still would be in the top 5. If I were to look at that list right now, the top 25 that I posted of the 2010s, yet Her would still be in the top 5. It just might be at number 5 as opposed to number 1 where I originally had it.
Gotcha. Okay. That's really exciting to hear.
Again, no knock on those movies, but I guess like as I mentioned in my criteria, as I've gotten older, I'm openly and choosing to respond to different things that are more tailor-made for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I have more fun doing it that way.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Those are all really good movies. Obviously, you're higher on Minority Report than I am. I still like it overall, but I do have a few issues with that film. But yeah, those are all really good. Was there, like, when considering those five, aside from her, perhaps, was there anything that surprised you when you look at those five, as far as maybe where they came from originally?
Well, I think what surprised me the most is what then became most unsurprising about it in the long run. So you mentioned being very curious to see where my list goes when I have something like the Royal Tenenbaums ranked as low as 26. When I saw this final list, I thought, man, that seems really low. And then I looked at what I have above it, and it's like, nah, okay, it kind of makes sense for me. It was kind of one of those things where I thought it was revealing something surprising until it didn't. But I do think, if anything, it is a reflection of how great these movies are that we're going to talk about, that I don't even have something like the Royal Tenenbaums or even Her or The New World in my top 25.
Gotcha.
But I think that was perhaps most surprising.
Okay. Yeah, that's really great to hear. Really curious to see where this goes for you. All right. For my 26 through 30, at number 30, I have Damien Chazelle's First Man. At number 21 is Midnight Special.
Okay.
At 28, I have Jordan Peele's Get Out.
Okay.
At number 27, I have The Worst Person in the World.
Great stuff.
And then at number 26, All We Imagine as Light. So
you got okay. So that, I guess the 26 through 30 slot was really more reserved for some of the more recent films that are top of mind.
Yeah, and again, perhaps that could change in a few years. Is it top of mind? Is it recency bias? Because we just did that episode with Adam a few weeks ago. Perhaps that certainly could be the case. The Worst Person in the World, again, in case you missed that episode with Adam, that was number 8 on my original list for 2021, 22, whenever that came out.
2021, yeah.
21. So it's been 4 years even since that film came out, but it just keeps registering higher and higher with me. All We Imagine as Light came out last year. It is extremely fresh, but I love that film with all of my chest. Like, it is a film I love to my core. I just don't see that film ever dropping for me. If anything, I think that's a film that will continue to climb higher and higher on this list. But 26 and 27 for those two felt good as it stands.
And sorry to cut you off, but just to reiterate once again, you had The Worst Person in the World at number 8 for the decade so far. Is that what you said?
No. Worst Person in the World was number 8 on my just year-end list for 2021.
Okay, that makes more sense, because I was trying to think of the math there. It's like, because I remember you talking about both films on that episode with Adam. I'm thinking, I feel like there were a few films missing, because I thought there was a bit of a gap between those two when you actually did that official decade list.
Yeah. So they were, when we did best of the decade so far, they were number 5 and number 4 respectively. And again,
okay, that's
you
interesting.
could say that's where the math comes in a little bit.
Well,
where
okay,
it makes sense to keep the order the same.
That's also pretty interesting, because then thinking of it that way, your list is going to have more representation of the 2020s than mine.
Yeah. No, and again, is it recency bias? I don't know. But those top 5 movies from the 2020s, I think, are special. Really, really special movies that I do think are heavy contenders for an exercise like this. More so than what we've seen with the New York Times, especially the New York Times, and maybe even IndieWire. And maybe it's because these films just came out in the last few years. They haven't had as much time to register. Although I think The Zone of Interest, wasn't that in the top 10 for the New York Times?
I think that was in the top 3. Wasn't that
top
like
3?
number 3?
Yeah, it was
like
really
that?
high.
I mean, and even, to their point, I know a lot of people were pushing back on them having, what was it, Parasite at number 1, Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, which is 2019. So that's still a rather recent movie. It's not from the 2020s, but it's very close.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have The Zone of Interest quite that high. It's number 7 on my best of the decade for the 2020s as it stands now. And that's a film that could also climb the ranks as it goes. I do obviously really love it. But I think right now, with All We Imagine Is Light, The Worst Person in the World. I'm very comfortable with those being at 26 and 27 as far as the best films we've seen in this century so far. Now, I will say they are perhaps a little interchangeable with something like Get Out, which I have at 28 on this list. I could put Get Out at 26 and shift those other two down and not lose any sleep. But that's ultimately where I landed with those two.
Yeah. There are a few I have here that are in, I don't want to call them placeholder numbers, but they could easily shift.
Yeah.
They could easily shift in a matter of minutes, honestly.
Yeah. And Get Out was a film that was at number 14 on my initial list for best of the decade for the 2010s. That is now shifted down a few slots, obviously. It's a film that I cannot get out of my mind. I do love it. I know most people probably go to Nope as their favorite Peele film to this point. I still think Get Out is equally a masterpiece. And
It's a smarter film. Certainly gets you thinking in a different way. I do prefer Nope, but it's mostly because of the spectacle of that one.
Yeah,
I think more so Jordan Peele's direction in that one, which is not to say it's a better directed movie. It's just the bigness of Nope is something I gravitate towards, but the smartness of Get Out makes that one more thought provoking.
Yeah, I think I will forever die on the hill that at least at this point in his career, that Nope is his directorial masterpiece and Get Out is his writing masterpiece, which is why I think they're both incredible movies and a great double feature.
Which makes us kind of a perfect middle ground. Because
it is a great middle ground. It's a lot of both.
A lot of both. In a way, it kind of is the Jordan Peele buffet.
It is. Yeah.
Maybe in a way that is his best movie because it's the most balanced.
You could argue that. Yeah, for sure. And I equally love Oz. I think those three films are all masterful in their own right. So Get Out is a film that I continually think about all the time. I do really love it. Of course, it has the best supporting acting performance of all time, so that gives it a little bit of an edge as well. And then, of course, you all know how I feel about Midnight Special and First Man, so that rounds out my first five here. 26 through 30.
Great stuff.
All right, 25 through 21. What do you got?
25 through 21. My numbers 25 and number 24 I put here on purpose because we had just talked about them, or at least I had just talked about them when we did our best of the decade, best of the 2020s specifically just last week. My number 25 right now is Pixar's Luca. My number 24 is Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. And I put them back to back because they were my numbers 3 and number 2 respectively when we did that exercise just last week.
Wait, hold up here. You were just talking about how my 26 and 27 are like these new films, and oh man, you put a lot of weight on these new films, and then yours are lower on the list
because I only have because I only have 3 from that decade. You're apparently going to have 5.
All right, fair enough. But it weights out to about the same since yours are ranked higher.
It actually, it might weight more in my favor when we get to. I'll just say when we get to Petite Maman later on in this exercise, it might actually put the edge on me as opposed to you. So maybe I'll have to keep those words.
I might have more films from the 2020s, but the weight still might balance out to be the same.
The weight might be in my favor, I guess.
More toward you.
Okay. Anyway, back to my original point. My number's 25 is Luca. My number 24 is Licorice Pizza. They were back to back. They were in my top 3 of the decade so far, the 2020s specifically. But I have them back to back in this list because if there is ever going to be a change with the 2020s, I could see a day where Luca actually overtakes Licorice Pizza. Just given how much Luca is a me film, I could see those switching.
It's so good.
I very purposely put them back to back here because I could see that switch eventually happening.
Okay.
So that's 25 and 24 at this point. My number 23 right now is Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden. Number 22, Julian Schnabel's The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And number 21, Zhang Yimou's Hero. One of the most beautiful looking movies that I think I've ever seen.
Okay. Really good stuff there. A couple of notes. One, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, remind me, where does that sit on your 2007 list?
That's a list that keeps changing. I think I
know it does. And the reason I ask is because based off of that year, I know there's at least one other film from that year that's going to be higher on this list for you. Would that be so? That's number 2 or number 3 for you for that year.
When we originally did our 2007 retrospective, I think I published that list with The Diving Bell and the Butterfly at my number 2. In actuality, it would probably be my number 5.
Number 5. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are 4 films I would take above it now, but at the time I put it at
that
number
are
2.
Also on this list. Then.
Oh yeah, 2007 is basically this list.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's what's interesting because I know at least one that will show up later. I didn't realize that you were going to have 4 others as well. That's so funny.
Yeah. But when you're talking about the greatest cinematic year ever, the better the year is, the more room for things to fluctuate, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
At least it is for me.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. That's so funny. That's so fascinating. Okay. What did you have at 21 again?
21 was Zhang Yimou's Hero.
Hero. Yeah, that was the other one.
Yeah.
Because I have that at 42.
Okay.
So it is in my top 50. 42 might sound low, but again, we're talking
it's not
about
low.
50
we're talking about 25 years.
A billion movies out of 25 years of movies. Yeah, I love it as well. Yeah.
We see what, an average of 100 movies each year. So that's 2,500 movies that we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, and again, it sounds simple, which is why I go back to picking children. Because even if you just took your number 1 movie from every year, that's 25. That's the majority of the movies that we're going to be talking about on this episode, let alone a top 50. That would still only be half if you're just taking your favorite film from every year. Now, obviously, it doesn't always correlate that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes your number 2 or number 3 films would be your number 1 in a lot of other years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always equate that way, but that's why I always come back to, I just like this exercise is a lot of fun, but it's also saddening because I'm having to pick between children that I love deeply. And Hero, I think I have at number 2 for its year, number 2 or number 3.
Yeah. I think I originally had it at number 1, but that was, full disclosure, that was the year that I had Hero, Before Sunset, and Spider-Man 2 in my top 3. That's a hell of a top 3.
Was that 2004?
2004, I believe it was. Yes.
Yeah, I have that at number 3 on my list. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the top end of that year is remarkable, and Hero is certainly one of the better films for sure. Yeah.
Probably should have won Best Director that year.
It's remarkable. All right, so good stuff there. Really like that a lot. All right, number 25 for me is my favorite film of 2017, Lady Bird. Greta Gerwig's
good stuff.
Wonderful
Good
Lady
stuff.
Bird. And number 24, I have Richard Linklater's somewhat polarizing film in Boyhood. Anytime that film is brought up, people either love it or hate it. There's just no in between when it comes to Boyhood.
That movie was how we shifted gears as critics. I blame that movie for that. Yeah, we came into our own because of that movie.
Yeah.
And it's because we had to rediscover it a few years later.
Yeah, which I very much still cling on. Like, that's a film that to this day impacts my day-to-day life. Like, very objectively.
Beauty and the Mundane.
Speaking.
Beauty and the Mundane, baby.
Absolutely love it. So, yeah, love Boyhood. That has now shifted to being my number 2 film of 2014.
Okay.
Number 23. Let's just go ahead and talk about it. 2007, once again, There Will Be Blood.
Okay.
That sits at 23 for me.
Mm-hmm.
Number 22 is my favorite film of 2008, Synecdoche, New York.
Oh, Charlie
I think that was
Kaufman.
2008.
Was that 2009? That was 2008. 2008. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Which was number 3 on my list originally. Again, going back to how I've progressed over these last few years, my number 1 initially was Wendy and Lucy, which I still love, still top 5. for me for that year. Love Wendy and Lucy, but that is a JD movie through and through. Wendy and Lucy is. Synecdoche, New York, again, there is a pathos to that movie, not the same as something like Wendy and Lucy, but it does have this intellectual thematic value that
while still
is
being
so
a JD
striking.
movie in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get the great Philip Seymour Hoffman as well. So yeah, my tastes are the same, but have shifted, evolved as well. So Synecdoche, New York is now my favorite film of that year. That sits at number 22. And then 21 is a film that you have already noted. It is Terrence Malick's The New World, which I do really love. It's a film that has dropped just a few spots in my best of the decade.
Okay.
Initially, I think it was at number 7. It is now dropped to number 10. Still really love it a lot. There's going to be a film I mention later. I don't think you'll find it surprising, but it has never stopped growing in my mind. I think about it all the time, and when I get to it, it'll make there's a lot of changes involved. I'll just put it that way.
You know, going to The New World for a moment. I'm looking at the lists that I originally published for each respective year when we did these retrospectives. So the year 2005 is one of those years that I would reorder a lot of these movies in my top 10 as I published them. But at the time, I did include The New World as my favorite movie of that year. And thankfully, I did, because that still stands. Even if some of these other ones shift, like a movie like Hustle and Flow would probably be my number 2 now. And maybe at the time I was not ready to admit a movie like that being so high on my list, but now now I don't care about that kind of thing anymore. That's one of those years that I think certain things would certainly shift, but I'm glad I had the right number 1 at the time.
Yeah, Hustle and Flow would probably be my number 3, number 4 for me. It would definitely come up a few spots. My number 1 and 2 are the same. They've just flip-flopped. So I had The New World at number 2. That's now number 1 for me.
Gotcha.
And the Hirokazu Koreeda film Nobody Knows, which was my number 1 originally, it still sits at number 2 and is actually number 44 on this list for me. So it's a great honorable mention. If we were doing our top 50, I would have mentioned it already. I really love that a lot. So yeah, The New World, number 21 for me. That's
good stuff. Good stuff. We got some crossover finally.
Yeah.
I think
I'm surprised it took that long.
I know. There's at least 1, maybe 2 movies in my 20 through 16 that'll be somewhere on your list. I'm almost sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd be shocked if that was the only crossover. I know there's at least probably, I'd say at least another 4 or 5 coming.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe
at
6.
Least? Yeah. Okay. Let's do 20 through 16.
All right, 20 through 16. We're in the top 20 now. And this is where the numerical ranking of these movies is kind of a moot point for me. Because honestly, like this is more importantly represented in my top 20 than anywhere else. My top 20 for this particular list would probably all be somewhere in like my top 100 favorite movies of all time. We're getting to that point. I'm not sure if it's the same for you, but it's certainly the case for me. So honestly, where they rank in this top 20, kind of silly at this point. It could really go anywhere. These are all 10 out of 10s for me. Right now, just for the purpose of this exercise, my number 20 is Edward Yang's Yi, the 3-hour life-affirming experience from the year 2000. Number 19, Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. Number 18, Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, which is a film I think I didn't even have at number 1 the year that it came out in 2006, but would be my favorite movie of that year now.
Okay, yeah.
Number 17, Tim Burton's Big Fish. And number 16, Paul Thomas Anderson once again with Punch Drunk Love.
Man, that's a great list of 5 there. EE is one of those movies that I also continually think about. I think I have that at number 5, number 6 on my list for the year 2000. It's in my top 10. It's a film I deeply, deeply love still.
I remember
if
it was
we
a
were-
film for you that, like, when you first saw it, you weren't sure if it was going to make your top 10 of that year when we did that retrospective, but it just kept, like, sitting
Yeah,
with
it
you
just
for a bit.
lingered,
Yeah.
lingered and lingered and lingered forever and ever and ever. So yeah, I do deeply love that film now.
It's a very patient film. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a movie that was definitely it wasn't one I was ready to admit right after watching it that it's one of the best of that particular year. You have to sit with that one and let it marinate.
You know, no, I agree. Is that your number one now? Because I think when we did that list initially, Almost Famous was number one for you.
No, Almost Famous is still my number one. So spoiler
It's
alert.
Oh, sorry. Fair enough. Okay. So EE would now be your number two, then I would presume.
Yeah, and I think it was it was my number two when we did that list.
And it was your
So,
number two then. Okay,
Yeah.
so has it
Actually,
changed for you?
looking at that list, the year 2000 and the top 10 I posted for that, I'm still happy with that. I don't think I'd make any changes as of yet.
I have made changes.
Okay.
I will foreshadow it that way for now.
All right,
I have
can't wait
made
to
some
see it.
changes, and not necessarily a ton of changes. There is one major change. Let me just put it that way.
I think I know what it might be, but I'll let
But-
you speak to it.
The rest of them, like the same 10 are still the 10. The order is just very different.
Yeah. Looking at this list, I think I know what you're alluding to, but I won't say. I don't want to spoil
Okay.
it.
Fair enough. EE, though, is a film that I do still really love. And if we were doing a top 100, like IndieWire or
Yeah.
the New York Times, it would find its way somewhere in the back half of this list for sure. I do really love it a lot as well. What was your number? What were the other four again?
After Yigi, it was The Master, Children of Men, Big Fish.
Oh yeah, Big Fish was the other one
Yeah.
that I was heavily contemplating a lot here, because I was going through that year, and while my number one for that year has not changed, Big Fish I do think has climbed to be my number two.
Okay, so just overtaking City of God for you?
Yes. But I kept going back and forth between those two.
Gotcha.
I will say though, neither of those films are in my top 40 here.
Okay.
But I do think they would be somewhere in the next 10.
This is a year, 2003, where I would definitely make quite a few changes as far as the top 10 I published.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about that offline. Yeah, we
I-
talked about that
yeah.
offline when we realized that neither of us had 28 days later in our respective top 10s. And that is probably one of the biggest changes that would happen.
Yeah, that absolutely, that cracks into my top 10 for sure. As far as that year goes. But yeah, I do think aside from 28 Days Later, I think I'm at a point where Big Fish would be number two for me.
Okay.
I still think I have City of God at number three, and then somewhere in that 6 through 10 range, I'm going to have 28 Days Later. Maybe
Yeah.
at number 7. Looking at it here,
Yeah,
Something to that effect.
I'm trying to think of which one of these movies I would probably drop out of my top 10. Even though I have it ranked really highly, the film American Splendor with Paul Giamatti, I have that at number 5 originally. It is one that I just haven't really mentally gone back to as much as Millennium Actress, The Curse of the Black Pearl, Shattered Glass, for instance, even Master and Commander.
Yeah.
So as much as that one spoke to me almost immediately when we did that exercise, it is probably the one I'll make room for when it comes to 28 Days Later. I think that is the one that would drop quite a few slots.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the film for me that would drop is In America, which I had, I think, at number 7 on this list, 7 or 8.
Number 7, yeah.
Yeah, number 7. I think that would eventually, I think that I'd land around, like it's still in that 11 through 15. I probably have it at like 13, something like that. And then have 28 Days Later in there. And I think I would keep the other films, but I think that's the one that would drop for me.
Yeah. I think that's very fair.
And perhaps we can, get to some of these revisions and some bonus content down the road. But
Oh, yeah. Take a lot of homework, but it's always fun to revisit those.
Yeah, and Punch Drunk Love is another one that's probably in that 41 through or not 41, that 51 through 60.
Okay.
Because that's another one that I also really love a lot as well. Yeah, that I continually think about. So.
I'm just realizing that I've already mentioned Paul Thomas Anderson 3 times for this exercise.
I mean, he's one of the best. I do love 2002. Punch Drunk Love is number 3 on my list for that year, and it's one that I really love a lot. Which is why, again, I go back to what I said earlier, that I just couldn't stop myself. I had to physically put the phone down, put the computer away, because at some point you just gotta stop. But you think about movies like Punch Drunk Love that I love deeply, that isn't in the top 50, and it feels like it should be mentioned somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. 2002 was a great year. That was a really good year.
Yeah, really good stuff there. All right. Continuing this on. 20 for me, the masterpiece that is Nickel Boys. Number 2 on my list for best of the decade so far, Nickel Boys.
All right, so
I
no
really
spoilers.
love
That something
20.
from the 2020s is coming up yet again.
Number 19 is Mad Max Fury Road. I have that at number 19. Number 18, I have Charlotte Wells' After Sun.
There it is. There's the next 2020 film.
There's the next 2020. So I got those 2 here that I really love. Number 17 for me is my favorite Pixar film. What I would argue the best, Inside Out.
All right.
I have it 17. That is still my favorite film from 2017. And again, that year in particular is a great example of what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, as far as how do I feel about these films? Does the math support how I feel about this as well? Because when I was initially ranking these films, especially because I didn't have the internet on the cruise, I was just kind of going through how I felt about them.
Yeah.
Mad Max Fury Road and Inside Out, I kept going back and forth on, just because I think Mad Max Fury Road is one of the best movies of the century so far. Huge film for 2015 and the 2010s. But I also kept going back to, well, Pixar is the best of Pixar, and their legacy, reputation speaks for itself. I think I had to put some weight into that.
I think that's fair. And I'm honestly realizing something really interesting, because I'm looking back or thinking back at the time that Inside Out first came out, and you and I saw it together, and I believe your wife was there too.
Yep.
I believe Brandy it was the 3 of us. We went out to dinner, and then we went to go and see Inside Out. And I remember the emotional reaction you had to that movie. I kind of feel like the year 2015 was to you as maybe the year 2021 was to me. Because remember, I talked about how I had maybe more of an emotional response to movies in 2021 because of where I was in my life. I had just around the time I was, still fresh in my relationship with my now wife, Maris, but we were really falling in love with each other in the year 2021. So naturally, I was emotionally responding to things in a very different way. And I kind of wonder 2015 was sort of the same for you, given where you were within your relationship and things like that.
I mean, with Inside Out, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. I talked about that actually last week on the show. I believe we went into that a little bit as Brendan was going through all the formulas in the spreadsheet. I retold my Inside Out story. I wrote an op-ed for that film for its 10-year anniversary.
It's insane.
A couple of weeks ago when it celebrated its 10 years. And it's one of the most personal pieces I've ever written. If people want to go and check that out at InSessionFilm.com. But I go into great detail about the film and how it moved me in the ways that Brennan is talking about, if you want to go and check that out. So that film, absolutely. Mad Max Fury Road is just one of these films that has had an interesting evolution for me, because
so visceral.
When we first reviewed it on the show, I liked, didn't love, then rewatched it for our year-end episode that year and completely fell in love with it.
Because I told
all
you
my
to.
criticisms.
I told you to look at different things in that movie, and I guess something clicked, didn't it?
And something very much clicked. So then it ended up being in my top 5 for that list originally. I think it sat around number 5, if I'm not mistaken. And then just over the years, it has slowly climbed higher and higher to the point where, and I didn't think this would ever happen because I really love Ex Machina a lot. And that is my number 3 for that year. But there's something about the spectacle and the poeticism of Fury Road that it just never leaves my mind.
Yeah.
So that's my number 1 and number 2 respectively. And on my best of the decade, they're 7 and 8 respectively.
Gotcha.
So just there's something about those two coming out the same year. I don't know what it is, but I do really love them a lot.
Regardless of how you feel about those movies, they feel like special movies. They really do feel like special movies.
They do feel really special for very different reasons. Obviously, they're two totally different movies, but I love them, and I do think they're two of the best films of the 2010s and of the century. I have them at 19 and 17 respectively here. And then at number 16 is The Social Network, which I'm still really high on. I think it is one of the defining films of the century, especially given where social media has gone, Facebook's evolution, Mark Zuckerberg's evolution over the last 20 years. That is a film that has remarkable staying power. I know we're going to talk about Sorkin wanting to do a sequel to it. And look, I don't think, I guess just to give it away, I don't think the film needs to have a sequel, but I understand why.
I understand why.
Feels the need to do a sequel because Facebook and Zuckerberg have not gone away. A lot of the nefarious things we see in that film have only gotten worse.
It's been very predictive in many ways. So I understand the wanting to revisit that, especially given the landscape of 2020, which apparently this new movie is going to focus on. We could talk about it further, but Sorkin the writer coming back, Sorkin the director. I have paused.
That's where we'll have some thoughts for sure.
Yeah.
But that is to say, that's why The Social Network is so defining of this century, because it tackles its subject material with such brazen confidence and then also becomes this predictive allegory for what followed the next 15 years after The Social Network. And it's stunning.
I normally don't like using hyperbolic descriptions when praising movies like, oh, it's a movie that defined a generation. But The Social Network kind of does. Like, in a way, it sort of defined the millennial generation and the millennial mentality when it came to what it means to run a business. I think it really was ahead of the curve in that way.
So good. And just dramatically still holds up incredibly well. The performances, you can go back to that film. Like, it's endlessly rewatchable as a drama and also incredibly visceral as a horror movie. Like, it does both of those simultaneously, even now to this day.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So that is my 20 through 16. Nickel Boys, Fury Road, After Sun, Inside Out, The Social Network. And again, like, I think that's a great eclectic mix of everything I've been talking about in terms of emotionality and my progression as someone who really, really craves for great craftsmanship and intellectualism.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah,
like all
absolutely. It's a buffet. It's a movie buffet.
Yeah. All right, 15 through 11. What do you got?
This is difficult because honestly, my 15 through 11 could really be my 6 through 10 in any other day. I'll reveal this now. If anything, my top 5 is really the top 5 that's going to be my top 5 forever. I don't see that ever changing, but my 6 through 15 could all fluctuate. So what I say here is really more representation of what it is right now, but that might not, permanently hold. Right now, my number 15 is Pixar's WALL-E.
Okay.
My number 14 is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
Oh, okay.
My number 13, we sort of alluded to this already, my number 1 film of 2000, Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous.
Nice. Okay.
All right. Number 12, Spike Jonze, Where the Wild Things Are.
Nice.
And number 1, The World of Studio Ghibli from Isao Takahata, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya.
Tail. All right, Kaguya. There it is. That is a really great eclectic mix as well.
If there is a theme here, it's eclectic mixes.
Yeah. Spider-Man 2, I deeply, deeply love. Well, I mean, I love all those films. Spider-Man 2 is interesting. I don't know where I would have that rank, but my best guess is similarly to what we were talking about some moments ago, that's probably in that 51 through 60 range. Because that came out in what, 2004, I believe.
2004.
Right? So,
yeah. So that was, we sort of mentioned that earlier. That was the year my top three were Hero, Spider-Man 2, and Before Sunset, which was a really great top three. And honestly, like, wasn't that the year where you and I had almost all crossover in our top 10 for the year 2004? I think it was.
Yeah. No, yeah. Did we really cross over on all four? I think you're right. Yeah.
I think that was the year
I
think that was the year that our top four was not the exact same, but it was the same four films. And we had at least 8 films crossover in both of our respective top 10s.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
that was the year that we agreed.
The most JD and Brendan thing ever, which is hilarious. But yeah, I think we did cross over in that way. My list has changed a little bit because I noted earlier Hero is now in that number 3 spot for me. Spider-Man 2, I think I had at number 3 originally. It now sits at number 4 on that list, which is why it's in that 51 through 60 range.
Gotcha.
But obviously a film I still really love. I mean, when you're talking about 100 films out of thousands and thousands over 25 years, I'd say that's still pretty good, but that's where I'm at. I'm just a little bit higher on Hero and 2 others that have yet to be named here. One of them I'm sure we'll both get to, I would imagine.
I think I've already said it, like, indirectly.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, that year was pretty ridiculous, especially at the high end of it. So
yeah, it was.
Yeah, really love that. I love that that's high for you, then.
That's I can't really shake it.
Yeah, no, love that. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Wall-E. That would be also in my top 5. So where that ranks on my list, maybe that's also in that 51 through 60 or 51 through 70, somewhere in there, for sure. Really, really love that film a lot as well. Where the Wild Things Are, that I think that still might be my favorite film of 2009.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Same here.
I'm trying to think. Actually, I have that at number 35 on my list. So
okay,
we
for this list in particular.
For this list, for best of the century. So I mean, we started off doing this as a top 30. If we arbitrarily started at 35, we would have already talked about it.
That's funny. But yeah, 35, weird number to start things off at.
I know. We could have done 41. We could have started at 41.
We could have. Then it would have been my full list.
Exactly. That's why I say that. Good stuff. Kaguya, love that as well. Deeply, deeply love that movie. Not at all surprised to see you have that there.
I don't think my top 10 is going to be that surprising for you, JD.
No. What did you have at 13 again?
Almost Famous.
Almost Famous. Yeah. And we joked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yep, really love that. Almost Famous is 41 on my list.
Okay.
So
good
it has dropped 1 spot to number 2. The film that replaced it, we're about to talk about here. And to your point, this 11 through 15, and really, I could probably say the same thing about 16 through 20, but especially 11 through 15, these are top 10 movies, but math is math. Yeah. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
You can't somehow shove 5 spots or 5 films into
all right.
into
so
that number 10 spot. But
so within your 11 through 15, is this where you have your new favorite film from the year 2000?
Yes. I'm about to get to that here in a second.
Where do you have it? At what number?
And hilariously, at number 13.
How about that? I think I know what film it is, but maybe I'll just let you go ahead and reveal it, and I'll say if I was right or not.
All right, here we go. And I think I know that you know what it is. We're just being vague for this.
Well, yeah, because I don't want to give it away for you. It's
Yeah.
your list. You want to be the one to introduce it.
Yeah. All right, number 15. My favorite film of 2007. I know there's big debate about this. I mentioned There Will Be Blood earlier. And look, I'm not here to debate anyone. Everyone else can have that debate. All I see are two beautiful pies. And
You're not
eat
here to
both
rain
of them.
blood on anyone else's parade.
Nope, absolutely not. There Will Be Blood, I deeply, deeply love, as well as No Country for Old Men, which is my number 15.
Okay.
I love both those movies. Everyone else can debate them. I really do not care. But No Country for Old Men, I do have at number 1 for that year. It's at number 15 on this list.
Okay, that's getting interesting.
And it was my number 9 for Best of the Decade.
It's an awesome movie.
For 2000s.
Awesome
for the 2000s.
movie. Yeah.
All right. Number 14. We somewhat alluded to it a moment ago without saying it explicitly. Before Sunset. I have it number 14.
Yep, it's been mentioned a few times already.
Mentioned a few times. Yep, my favorite film of that year. Number 13, my new number 1 for 2000, Beau Travail.
Okay, that I did not expect. That's not where I thought you were going. I thought you were going to say, "Oh, brother, where art thou?"
Nope, I do love Oh Brother. That probably slides down to number 3 because I think I had it at number 2 originally.
Oh,
I do love it.
Claire Denis making
Claire
the
Denis.
rounds.
This is a film I cannot stop thinking about. Cannot stop thinking about this film.
It's like a ballet. It's such
It
an
is.
interesting movie.
Such an evocative movie. It is incredibly poetic. I love its rhythms. I love the way that it moves. I love the
It's
way
the
Claire
rhythm
Denis
of
tells
the
that
night.
story.
That whole dance sequence at the end is one of the
The
most evocative
ending,
things I've ever seen.
That I especially cannot stop thinking about. I can see the choreography, the setting, the room, the performance. I can see it all vividly in my mind, even now as we're talking about it. I just cannot escape it. And even after we did that show initially, like as soon as we stopped recording, I immediately thought to myself, I have underrated this movie.
Well,
it is higher than I think it is.
It's
Or
one of
than
those
I had it.
movie. It's one of those movies where if you were to watch it for the first time and immediately say it's the best movie of the year, I don't know if that's doing the film proper justice because it's a movie that asks you to sit there and think about it and let it marinate.
Yeah. It has to waft for a
It has to
while,
waft.
yeah.
So if anything, you having it, I think you had it at number 6 when we originally published that
Yeah,
list.
something like that. Yeah.
I think if anything, it was just more of a reflection of how much homework we had to do, and it was one of the last films you watched in preparation for that list.
Absolutely. I had it at number 6. And look, I really did love the top 5 that we talked about on that exercise, but I just could not stop thinking about it. In fact, we did some bonus content like a week later talking about revisions we've made to all of the year-end list from that particular decade.
That's right. You
And
did
even though
allude to
we
that,
had
yeah.
just done 2000, that retrospective, even just a couple of weeks later, I talked about how Beau Travail had climbed to like number 2 from number 6. That was the one major change.
I remember that. I do
from
remember
that
that.
list.
Yeah, good point.
So even in just a 2-week time, could not stop thinking about it. Again, I love Almost Famous. I have it at number 41 on this list. Deeply, deeply love it. But there's something about Claire Denis' filmmaking and evocative storytelling that I just love. It lingers over me. I can't stop thinking about it. I love it. So I have it at number 13 here.
Number 13. All right.
All right, number 12, Y Tu Mamá También. I love that film as well. That is my number 12.
Okay.
And my favorite film from 2002.
Yeah.
Yes, 2002.
Was my number 2 of that year. I originally had it behind Punch Drunk Love, and I'll just simply say, yeah, reversal.
A little bit of reverse.
Reverse.
Okay. And number 11 for me is Children of Men. Alfonso Cuarón, I believe you mentioned it earlier.
Oh, so you have Cuarón
Yes.
back to back here, it looks like.
I have Cuarón back to back. You know what? I didn't even think about that, which again goes back to how I just thought about the films themselves, not so much trying to filter out this through filmmakers. I didn't even think about that until just this very moment.
You're welcome. Well,
So,
I've
yes.
got a back-to-back in my top 10, so I'm thinking
there you
about
go.
that ahead of you. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and again, I just go back to how do I feel about these films within the context of the 2000s,
Hmm.
and if I'm going to put them or filter them through any of the films through the 2010s, where do they rank? And obviously, when we get to the top 10, there are a few from the 2010s that are in my top 10. But yeah, those two films I really love, and that's just where they fell for me when I'm considering the best of the 2000s.
Sure, makes
So
sense.
on that list, they're number 5 and 6 respectively, for best of the decade of the 2000s, and they fall 11 and 12 here with Beau Travail at 13. And again, those three plus Before Sunset and No Country, those are top 10 films for me.
Oh yeah.
For this list, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But
They're that good.
math
They're that good.
is what it is.
Math is a thing of
Yeah.
unfortunate beauty.
Yes. It's helpful, but also you want to punch it in the face.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, we're down to the top 10. 10 through 6. What do you got?
10 through 6. Okay. Again, at this point, it's what it is. It could change in a matter of minutes. But right now, number 10, I have maybe my favorite Spike Lee joint, 25th Hour.
Okay.
Number 9, I'm sure you'll talk about this movie in a little bit. Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love.
Okay.
Number 8 is where I have Richard Linklater's Before Sunset. And speaking of back-to-back filmmakers, my number 7, Everybody Wants Some, baby.
Okay. Yep. That's a Brendan pick through and through.
It's a Brendan pick through and through. I'm ready to admit it. I mean, we're talking about 2 movies that are in my top 3 for Richard Linklater. My favorite of his is probably still Before Sunrise. So, but these 2 would definitely round out that top 3. So, yep, Everybody Wants Some, my number 7. And number 6, going back to the year 2007, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably my number 3 from that year. I've gone through and updated that list. Assassination of Jesse James, I think initially was at 6 or 7, something like that.
It's a lot of movie. It really is.
Yeah. I think it's my number 4 because I still would have Zodiac at my number 3 and I actually have that at number 39 on this list. I've mentioned it a couple times. I've probably mentioned more than 10 films that would fit in that 51 through 60 range at this point. But
so you're making up math as you go.
I'm just making up math. But genuinely, all the other films are theoretical. I can say confidently, objectively, Jesse James is actually somewhere in that 51 through 60.
It's got to be. I would hope
it is. 100%. It is really good. Really, really good. So, love that as well. Some of the others, I'm sure we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some crossover here.
Of that crop, especially because we're in the 10, was there anything that surprised you or anything that's jumped up the most for you out of that crop?
I don't think so. I think if anything, when I originally put this list together, I actually had Where the Wild Things Are and The Tale of the Princess Kaguya in my top 10 over top of In the Mood for Love and 25th Hour. Just given how much I've responded to those movies as coming-of-age movies of a sort, which is very much a genre that's tailor-made for me, as you know. So I guess if there was any surprise, I was kind of surprised to see how, at this point, my numbers 8 through 10 were basically the exact same back-to-back when we did our Best of the 2000s episode. There's a lot about our Best of the 2000s that are sort of resurfacing here when we get to this top 10, because I originally had Where the Wild Things Are above 25th Hour, Before Sunset, and In the Mood for Love when we did the top movies of the 2000s. But I did switch that a little bit, just given maybe more so your criteria, how you kind of look at things in a more, visual way and how they function as movies. And I think there's something about like In the Mood for Love, for instance, and just how that functions as a movie that I had to put that above certain things right now.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's inescapable in that way. That film is incredibly evocative as well. and it just stays with you. It really does stay with you a lot,
And-
and I do love that about that film.
And 25th Hour in the same way. The way we talk about something like The Social Network defining a generation, I feel like 25th Hour sort of does the same thing. Less so from a millennial business standpoint, but more so what it means to live in a post 9/11 world, what that paranoia looks like, how that affects the human spirit. I think if there's any movie that really gets that paranoia and that emotional side most right without it being a political movie necessarily, I think 25th Hour is maybe the top of the list there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love that you have that high. It's at number like 8, I think, 7 or 8 for my 2002 list. But
Okay.
I mean, obviously, I love it. If it's in my top 10 of that year, obviously, I do really love it. But you're clearly a little higher on it than me. Still a great movie. Love to see that there. That you're that high on it, like top 10 of the century, that high on it. That's really, really great.
Like I said, it might be my favorite Spike Lee joint.
Yeah.
It's hard to say it's better than something like Do the Right Thing, but
Yeah, I'm still there with Do the Right Thing.
but I think those are probably his top 2 at the very least for me.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, good stuff. My number 10 has already been mentioned. In fact, well, two of the next 5 I'm about to mention have already been talked about. And number 10 for me is Spike Jonze's Her.
Okay.
Love this movie. And this is another one of those that was interesting. This was the sitting outside on the balcony, serenity, letting emotion kind of take charge here a little bit, because this is a film that when I put this list together initially was at like 13 or 14, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. And I wanted to try to figure out why it was sitting there. And some of it comes down to, okay, well, Children of Men was number 3 on my best of the decade for the 2000s initially. Sure. That's at number 5 now. Okay. I'll talk about some of the other changes here in a minute. But it sat there at number 3 initially. Her, I think, was there at 4 or 5. And so, it's not letting math dictate, but how do I determine where this falls? How am I going to break the difference between these two films? And ultimately, that's the one film out of all of these that we've talked about where I think I just let emotion more than anything else
just kind of dictate it.
Kind of dictate where it lands, because I love that film so much. It would be my number 1. It's my number 2 for 2013. It would be my number 1 in most other years in this century. In most other years. There are a few others we'll talk about where that wouldn't be the case, but for the most part, it would. I deeply love it. It's another one of those films like The Social Network that, because of the prominence of AI, and it almost feels like real life artificial intelligence and technology that we've seen have brazenly tried to rip that movie in some ways. So it didn't just become predictive, it became the model for some of what we see today, which is insane. To the point where Scarlett Johansson had to sue certain companies over it all. Like, it's just crazy. So yeah, I love that film. But again, it's one of those like on its own terms, there is an emotionality to it, but then there's all of the craft, the performances, and everything else.
It's a great romance movie, and I say that very loosely because it's a very challenging and provocative romance movie as well.
So good. And number 9 for me is my new favorite film of 2014, and that is Hayao Miyazaki's The Wind Rises.
Okay, I knew that was coming at some point.
Yes. And another one of those like Beau Travail that I just can't stop thinking about.
Yeah.
Deeply love it. My number 9 here.
One of his best movies.
I know that you have a film from the 2020s coming into your top 5. If you've been paying attention, it has not been mentioned since we first brought it up. So I know that it's coming to Brennan's top 5. But my favorite film of the 2020s sits at number 8 for me. That is Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Number 8. And admittedly, maybe this is where the math did become it did play a role here a little bit. because I wanted to have Oppenheimer more at like 5 or 6. I'm like that high on this film. I think it is a full-on masterpiece, and
it might get there eventually, though, right?
And it might eventually. And I guess that's a great transition to what I'm about to say here. The reason I dropped it down to 8 is kind of because it's fresh and new.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
I did, like, at the risk of maybe overrating it a little bit. Maybe I'm underrating it. I don't know. Maybe in the next 20 years, it'll climb up to as high as 2 or 3. Who knows? Or maybe it could fall. I don't know. But right now, I do think it is one of the very, very best films of this century. I like emotionally, I'm more at like a 5 or a 6. But there's something about how time has, like, we've been able to digest some of these other films a little bit further to create more of a legacy that eventually gave weight to those films that I'll talk about here in a minute. That's why I have Oppenheimer at 8.
I think at the very least in about 10 years or so, and I feel like the consensus is already suggesting this, but I think it'll be even more prominent in like 10 years or so that Oppenheimer is maybe one of the top 20 best picture winners ever. I think a lot of people already think that, but I think it'll be, I think in about 10 years or so, that'll be more universally agreed upon.
Yep, I agree. And I'm very much already there. I think this is an all-timer. Through and through, hands down.
Hey, look at that. The Academy can get things right sometimes.
They turns out they can get it right. Yeah. I mean, and like even in real time, it felt like we were watching history unfold. Yeah. That this is a film that people will be talking about for decades and decades and centuries down the road.
Yeah.
Love Oppenheimer. That is my number 8 here. Number 7 for me is my favorite film of 2012, and that is Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. 2 of the best performances ever put to the silver screen. Love the writing, love The Master. That's my number 7. Number 6, a little bit of that Spike Jonze emotional thing. It is Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums.
Okay, there's that one. I was waiting for The Royal Tenenbaums to show up.
Yep. So, and again, like initially I had that behind Oppenheimer, but my emotionality just couldn't live with it. So even though Oppenheimer might deserve it, but I think The Royal Tenenbaums is just as good in a lot of ways. I love that cast.
It's kind of one of those things where I feel like, at least if I were you might go ahead and rewatch The Royal Tenenbaums thinking, okay, I think I have this behind Oppenheimer. And then you get to a line like, it's been a hard year.
Yeah.
And then it's like, nope, this is better.
Yeah. And look, I mean, the craft is obviously there with a film like The Royal Tenenbaums as well. But yeah, I love that film. And it's Anderson at his peak, I think. Yeah. Like, I loved a lot of what he's done lately, but a lot of what he's done lately kind of started with the experimentation that he began with The Royal Tenenbaums.
That's like his true debut of sorts.
Yeah. And it's like, I feel like that's what he's going back to, is really more that than what we saw after that up until Moonrise Kingdom. Which, again, I love those movies. I love Anderson and all of his quirkiness and those films as well. But there is something about The Royal Tenenbaums and how it fits into this era of Wes Anderson that I just deeply, deeply love.
Kind of feels like the movie that should have come out like just before the Grand Budapest Hotel or something like that.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love The Royal Tenenbaums. That's an all-time movie for me. So that's my 6.
That's your 6.
The Wind Rises, Oppenheimer, The Master, The Royal Tenenbaums. That's my 10 through 6.
All right. Already had some crossover there. Really great stuff. We're on to our top 5 now. And I will say this, with my top 5, there's a good chance that at least 4 of my top 5 are maybe in my top 10 of all time. We're talking about all-timers here. Movies I absolutely love, and I'm sure you're the same way with your 5 as well.
Yep. Absolutely. These are all-time movies. Hands down.
And at least one of mine in my top 5 has already been mentioned by you. Another one I know you're going to have in your top 5, so we'll cross over there and we can share our thoughts on that collectively. But yeah, my number 5 is one you've mentioned, and that is Alfonso Cuarón's Y Tu Mamá También.
Okay.
Not even probably. It is my new favorite film of the year 2002. I originally had it behind Punch Drunk Love. Those two would now switch. Each Mama Time Again, I think, is the best movie of that year.
Okay.
Number 4, Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood. A formative film for me. Film for me. And yet, not even my favorite movie of the year 2007.
You're going to have 2 from that year in your top 5.
My number 3 is also from that year, and that is Ratatouille.
Ratatouille. Okay.
All right.
And I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Yeah, as much as you've been on the animation train lately. That doesn't make that makes all the sense in the world. Yeah.
And my number 2 will make a lot of sense as well, because I've already alluded to how much I love Celine Sciamma's Petite Maman. That is my number 2. Which means number 1 is no surprise. Yeah, number 1 is no surprise. You're going to have this in your top 5. I know you are, and that is Steven Spielberg's AI, artificial intelligence.
Yep. Good stuff. AI, we've talked about forever. Petite Maman, you and Adam Kempenar had a great little segment praising and raving over that film.
You left and got a beer and came back and we're still talking.
I love it. I do need to give that one another go. There Will Be Blood. I do really love that. I mentioned that earlier on my list. I have that at 23. So just a little bit behind you, but still one of the best of the century for sure.
And it's an interesting one for me to have that high, because I have to say, even if it is my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie, it's primarily because of the filmmaking and the scope of it, and the fact that I saw it at a time when I really learned to love what movies were and what they meant for not just me, but also intellectually. It was like, that was a huge formative experience seeing that movie in the theater. Yet I don't think it's the Paul Thomas Anderson film that provokes me intellectually as much as some of his others. I think The Master is a more provocative movie. I think Punch Drunk Love's a more provocative movie. Even as of late, I think Licorice Pizza stimulates me intellectually more so than There Will Be Blood does. If anything, I think There Will Be Blood is maybe the best at being a movie more so than anything else. And that's why I have it so highly.
No, that is perfectly fair. And I do really love the film a lot. My only issue with the film, and perhaps why it ranks where it does, is the Paul Dano of it all. I don't fully love it, but how much of a hindrance is it if it's my 23rd film of the century so far? You know what I mean?
I've learned to love his performance because of how grating it actually is. There's something very childish about it.
Yeah.
And I've kind of come to appreciate that.
Yeah, totally fair. Ratatouille is interesting. I do love it. I don't know where it would rank for me. Obviously, it would be at 100, somewhere in 100. It's number 6 currently on my list for 2007.
Gotcha.
I could flip-flop that with Once, which I have at number 5. So you could say I have it at number 5.
Yeah. But Once is such a you movie. Like Once,
it is. It's a me movie. I love them both equally. You can, I won't lose sleep. You can put Once at 6. Either way, it's a top 5, 6 movie of that year for me for sure, hands down. It's my number 4 Pixar movie. So yeah, it's in my top 100. No doubt about that. Very much a Brendan pick though. I do find it a bit funny that you have it ranked higher than There Will Be Blood though. Like just by a smidge. It's just such a Brendan thing to do, and it's the best. In fact, I would have been disappointed if you didn't do that.
Well, of course I'm not going to do that. This is my list, so of course it's going to represent me.
Well, of course, that's what I mean. Like if you would have flip flopped those, I would have argued right here for you to put Ratatouille above There Will Be Blood.
It's like Brennan, you're lying if you do that.
You're lying to yourself. Stop it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Ratatouille's that's a me movie through and through.
I love it. That's great. And then Petite Maman, number 2 of the century. That's crazy. I love that. Very exciting. Here I am thinking I'm overhyping Oppenheimer at number 8.
Maybe I'm overhyping the year, the decade so far.
So maybe I should just put Oppenheimer at 6 and call it a day and not overthink it. Maybe I did overthink it with Oppenheimer. I don't know. But look, I'm not going to cry because I have Wes Anderson at number 6. Like that's just not gonna be a thing that happens.
Yeah, you're not gonna lose sleep at night for that.
Nope. All right, my top 5 here. And number 5, admittedly, this is a bit of a cheat because I am combining 3 movies here, but it is the experience of Lord of the Rings.
You're doing that. Okay.
I
think
did
that's
it
fair.
for best of the decade. I did it for best of the decade. I'm doing it here again, collectively as an experience. And look, those 3 movies are shot back to back to back in a way that is meant to be one large experience anyway. So I don't think I'm going to be losing sleep over this. And when we talk about what is defining of the 2000s or of this century, The Lord of the Rings is going to come to mind pretty much immediately for a lot of people, including myself. So I do have that here at number 5. Number 4 for me, my favorite Coen Brothers film, an all-time movie for me. I think this has climbed to the point, despite it being maybe even outside my top 10 initially when we did our top 10 movies of 2013. That is Inside Llewyn Davis. Is now
I see it behind you. I see it behind you. You've got the Blu-ray back there.
Got it there. I love this film with all of my heart. I love it, love it, love it. I have
top 3 Coen Brothers film. Yeah, top 3 Coen Brothers for sure.
Yeah, number 4 here for me. One of the best soundtracks of all time. Oh my God. I still a decade plus later listen to it all the time. It's so good. Oh, indeed. Number 3, the next 2 have already been mentioned. Number 3 for me is Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love.
Yep.
Love it. We talked about it earlier. Number 2, Steven Spielberg's AI, Artificial Intelligence. That was my number 1 movie of the 2000s.
Yep.
As well.
Yep.
My number 1 film in my top 10 of all time.
No surprise. No surprise.
The Tree of Life.
Yeah, not surprised at all.
Malik. And we've talked about The Tree of Life many times over the years.
Talk about life affirming. Talk about a life affirming experience for many people.
Absolutely. Eventually I'm going to get the tattoo of the baby's foot.
I'm surprised you don't have that already.
Yeah, I think it's just mostly just finding time and getting the money for it. But it's a priority. I
often thought about if I were to ever get a tattoo of a favorite movie of mine, what would be the defining image and from what movie? And I don't know what that would be.
That's definitely it for me. I am going to get that tattoo. I don't know when, but I love it. I deeply, deeply love that image. And it defines that film in a lot of ways for me. I do love it. I'll never forget us talking about it here on the show with the great Jay Ledbetter when we had Jay tears. It wasn't just me for once. It was someone else. That was a great experience as well.
That was,
We've loved
that was a very emotional experience. We all got pretty emotional there. But man, you still got me down this rabbit hole of what would be my cinematic tattoo.
Yeah.
Maybe
the rat. Who knows? Or the 2 girls in Petite Maman.
I think in actuality, it might be the actor Takashi Shimura sitting on the swing in Akiru. It might be that. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. There's been some really great movies this century, it turns out. So
absolutely.
I know we've talked about them a lot. Real quick, I know we're going long here. Any honorable mentions you want to just note real fast?
Yeah, I will say these aren't really ranked. If anything, this is just more of a list of 10 or so additional movies that I considered for this. But if I were to have a numbers 31 and 32, it would be Lars von Trier's Dancer in the Dark and George Miller's Furiosa Mad Max saga. Those just missed the top 30 here. But a few others I considered here were Perfect Days, Wim Wenders' film, The Florida Project from Sean Baker, Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive, Faces Places from J.R. and Agnes Varda, Little Women, Greta Gerwig's film there, Jordan Peele's Nope, The Banshees of Inisherin, Dick Johnson is Dead, Ex Machina. These are all films I heavily considered for this top 30. And you'll notice that most of them are from either the late 2010s or 2020s. And again, I think it was just one of these instances where they're still pretty fresh. I kind of want to let them marinate for a little bit more before I really push them into an official list like this. Maybe in 5 years or so they will. maybe we'll make some changes here. But if there were more recent films that came close to entering this top 30, those were the ones.
Yeah, nice. I noted earlier I have a top 50. I'm just going to name them real fast, the next 20 I have here. And we've talked about a few of them already. Little Women, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Lost in Translation, Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, Where the Wild Things Are, Parasite, Tar, The Zone of Interest. I don't have it 3, but I have it at 38. Zodiac, Spring Breakers, Almost Famous, Hero, The Florida Project, Nobody Knows, Adaptation, Moonlight, Roma, First Cow, Past Lives, The Brutalist. Rounds out my 50.
Movies are good. Movies are good, man.
Yeah, and obviously, I would love to do another 50 here. I probably could quite easily.
Well, maybe another bonus content will just be another 50.
Another 50, yeah.
We'll do our 51s through 100.
Yeah. Okay, that'll do it for this week's show. Have loved the 21st century so far. People keep saying movies are dead. And I guess if all you see are the F1s of the world, then yeah, maybe movies are dead a little bit.
Is that an allusion to how we felt about F1?
No, maybe. It's fine. Spoiler alert, I guess, for that review. Yeah, I mean,
it's Top Gun Maverick is what that is.
Exactly. Well, look, yeah, if all that, or look, Jurassic World Rebirth, a lot of people are going to see this week. And it's hilarious because the one day of internet I get on the cruise, I pull up my phone and the first thing I see are the reactions to Jurassic World Rebirth. And to a T, everybody was like, it looks great visually, bad movie. And I'm like, what a surprise.
It's a Gareth Edwards movie.
That's a Gareth Edwards movie if I've ever heard one. So I mentioned that months ago when the trailer came out. That's exactly what was going to happen. Here we are yet again.
That's gonna make it a fascinating one when we talk about the Jurassic series and where it fits in. I can't wait for I'm more interested in that conversation than I am the movie itself.
I know. It should be fun. It'll be fun. We'll see where it goes. But I mean, all of that to say, if that's all you're watching, then yeah, maybe movies aren't for you anymore. But there are great movies every single year. And hopefully people go and watch them. Because there's good stuff. Speaking of good movies, next week on the show, best of the movies of 2025 so far.
Yeah.
So you can be on the lookout for that as well. Maybe Jurassic World Rebirth will be in the top 5. Who knows?
We haven't seen it yet, but no, it won't.
No, it won't. No.
I'm already predicting that. There's no way.
I agree. We're going to try to get to some bonus content this week, so be on the lookout for that. Again, be sure to subscribe. Patreon, Apple Podcast subscriptions, or YouTube memberships. We will have reviews for the aforementioned F1, as well as 20 years later, LEO, as well. I was not able to get to Women in Session last week, being out on the cruise, but I will get a new episode from Women in Session up this week, so you can be on the lookout for that. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Movies. 21st century. They've been good.